and to push God down the stairs. I remember instantly thinking to myself, I'm going to hell. I have just pushed my Father, who represents God, down the stairs.
Welcome to Pure Passion. My name is Jonathan Daugherty. When we first began airing Pure Passion almost 7 years ago, our first interview was with show producer David Kyle Foster, whose life as a preacher's kid struggling with masturbation, pornography, homosexuality, and eventually male prostitution, plus his years spent as an actor in Hollywood and then as a member of a cult prior to getting saved while on a trip to Israel, was one that needed more time to tell than we could give it back then. So we've decided to revisit David's amazing story during the next 2 episodes. If we haven't convinced you yet that Jesus Christ can set anyone free from anything, then sit back and watch the story of God's relentless pursuit of a young man whose purpose in life was to show God just how much He hated him.
I was born in 1951. I was the third of 4 boys. My father was a Presbyterian pastor. In fact, he was the 3rd generation of Presbyterian pastors that went all the way back to the Covenanter Scots in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So he was a very strict disciplinarian. We could not play cards on Sunday. At one point, we couldn't even read the Sunday paper on Sunday. So he came out of that sort of strict Sabbatarian Covenanter Scots line. That whole Scottish line was very self-contained and independent, fiercely so. And we did not share our emotions. We did not hug. We did not affirm each other. I never heard from my father, I love you, you're my son, you're good, that sort of thing. I don't remember him ever hugging me, although I'm sure he must have at some point. My mother's side was also Irish and Scots-Irish. So we had the British Isles pretty well covered there in the family line, and they were very stoic as well. I, on the other hand, was very sensitive temperament. I took things more deeply when things were said. Something that you might have said to my brother and then said to me, I would have taken it more deeply than my brother would have. And so it would have affected me more. So my father's harshness, he was a strict disciplinarian, we got the belt, was more impactful to me than it was for my brothers. Also, what he didn't say, the lack of the affirmation, the lack of the hugging, really affected me deeply. And I grew up feeling completely unloved. It's hard to imagine that because the family was basically a good family. Mom and Dad were basically really good people. But I grew up feeling unloved. In fact, at one point I grew up feeling that my father actually hated me. And as a child, you sort of hate back. That's what you do. You lash back with what you believe you're getting. And so I grew up with a very strained relationship with Dad. Around the age of 8 or 9, I can't pin it down, but something really went wrong. We had moved from Florida to Maryland. That could have been it, but I don't think that was enough for what happened. I tried to commit suicide when I was 9. I was very distraught, very emotionally upset. I did not think my parents loved me. There was a bully on the playground who would beat me up every single day. I was just in crisis, and I had broken up with my girlfriend, and my mother had made me break up with her, so I was blaming my mother for humiliating me in front of her. So I was really distraught, and I tried to throw myself down the stairs to break my neck. It was kind of a half-hearted effort, however, so I was halfway afraid of crippling myself and becoming a quadriplegic if I wasn't successful in killing myself. So I sort of half-heartedly did it. But when I hit the bottom of the stairs, my mother came running into the room because she had ordered me to go to my room. And she didn't know I was trying to kill myself, but she starts screaming at me and yelling at me that I wasn't doing what I was told and to get back into my room. Here I am trying to kill myself, and I'm getting screamed at. So This was, for the sensitive temperament I had, this was massively hurtful for me. I didn't even know how to say the words "I feel unloved." Those sort of concepts didn't even occur to me back then. I just knew that I wanted to die, that life was just really too painful. This guy on the playground was beating me up every day on the playground. I would come crying home, telling Mom and Dad what had happened, and they wouldn't do anything. So I realized I had to handle this myself, and one day I'm out on the playground and I knew he was a really bad kid. And he just liked dirty jokes and filthy language. And so I decided to just take my clothes off on the playground in the middle of the neighborhood just to make him laugh so he wouldn't beat me up. And it worked. He laughed, and he couldn't stop laughing. And so I ran around the room with my underwear in my hand, making this guy laugh so that he'd stop beating me up. And he actually never beat me up from that day forward. And I didn't register this consciously, but at the time, subconsciously, it registered in me that I could get people to like me by taking my clothes off. And that story will pick up later on in my story, because that's what I ended up doing for a living for a while. Became a male prostitute. A few days later, one of the elders of the church comes over for dinner with his family and his daughter, who was about my age. So while the adults were in the living room talking and we were in the TV room, I stripped for her and she loved it. So once again, this message got sort of reinforced in my mind that people will like me if I do this. So I decided I was going to be the bad preacher's kid. And that's how I was going to be accepted. Because people assumed that a preacher's kid would be a goody two-shoes and wouldn't be any fun, boring, and get out of here, we don't want to play with you. So if I could become the bad preacher's kid, then I would be in on the in crowd. And that's exactly what I did. Started smoking at 9, smoked a pack a day, swearing a blue streak. Not at home, mind you, but at home and in the church, I put on this perfect, angelic, cherubic face, and I was the acolyte, and I did all the right things and put on this mask so that my father would not be embarrassed by me, so that my actions wouldn't affect his career or his life.
You may have heard that in his memoir, Love Hunger, David Kyle Foster shares his desperate search for love during his first 29 years of life. But did you know that in the second part of the book, he unveils the most transformative revelations, impartations, and healing moments given him by God since that day of salvation? It's such an incredible story that we're developing a film based on David's book. Get a copy of Love Hunger now, or one of the many Love Hunger-themed items that we've had commissioned to raise funds for the film. Go to purepassion.us. David Kyle Foster describes from Scripture the sanctification process in his book, Transformed into His Image, Hidden Steps on the Journey to Christ-likeness, borrowing key insights from leaders like Leanne Payne, Larry Crabb, and Benedict Rochelle. This book calls the Christian deeper into the life that God created us to have and shows God's provision for making it possible. Download your copy of Transformed into His Image today, wherever ebooks are sold, or get the paperback version at our online store at www.purepassion.us.
About the same time, I discovered masturbation, all by mistake. I was climbing a pole on the playground, and I had this pleasure, and I had no clue what it was. Nobody talked about sex in our family. To this day, nobody's talked about sex in our family. That's slight exaggeration, but basically that's what it was like back when I was a child. So I had no clue why I was feeling the pleasure, and so forth and so on. And I concluded I had contracted cancer. Because of the way I spoke back to my parents or disobeyed them, or for some reason, God had given me cancer. It's comical now, but I really believed it back then. I thought I had gotten cancer, and yet the pleasure was so pleasurable, I continued doing it anyway because I needed something to get rid of this pain, this psychic pain that I was having in my mind and my heart on a continual basis. We had a lot of fighting in our family, and I could not take it with my sensitivity levels as they were. And I would leave the TV room at night and go out into the living room where no one was and hide behind the couch and just lay on the floor between the window and the couch just to get away from the sound of the yelling. Or I would go out into the car and lay on the floor of the back seat of the car just so I could have peace and silence and not hear yelling and strife. It affected me that deeply. We had our stash of Playboy magazines and Mad magazines. We started out with Mad, of course. As we grew older, Playboy came into the picture. And of course, this was something that could not be discovered by Dad lest we die. So we were, we were not obedient kids by any means. And I brought a lot of what happened to me onto myself simply by the rebellion that I had in my heart against my parents. I did not honor them. I wanted different parents. And I ran away twice. And the first runaway attempt, they played good cop. Mom was the good cop. The second runaway attempt, Dad played the bad cop. And I was beaten really severely the second time around. And I remember as he was hitting me, thinking to myself, you're not my dad. You don't love me. And I'm not your son. And I don't love you. And I remember there being a separation, a very stark separation in my heart that day. The psychologists will tell you it's called defensive detachment. When you try to detach yourself emotionally from the source of pain. And so in order for his pain against me not to hurt as much, I had to pretend that he wasn't really my father. It was really somebody else doing this. And so I separated my identity from my own father. Now here's the problem. That's where you get your identity as a young boy. You get it from your father. And so I was cutting myself off from developing in a healthy manner in terms of sexual identity and feeling good as a male and knowing how to interact with the opposite sex. I virtually cut myself off from that. And I would not speak to my father after that unless I absolutely had to, from that point on, all the way through college. That's how furious I was at being unloved. Another way that I would escape would be to go to the movie theater. And I would sit in the movie theater all day. I would watch the movie over and over and over again just so I wouldn't have to be at home. And during those years, and this went on for years and years, in fact, the rest of my childhood, I became those characters in those movies. One day I would be John Wayne, and the next day I'd be, Steve McQueen or somebody like that. And that's when I began taking on this fantasy identity to fill in the gap for the identity that I lacked. I was not getting fed an identity from those who God meant to feed it into me. And so I was creating one on my own and imagining myself as other people and imagining myself as heroic and the ladies' man and athletic and all the things that I wasn't. Although I must say, in the early years, in the 9 to 13, 14-year range, I was quite popular with the girls, and I had several girlfriends, and I was a top dancer. Jane and I, in particular, I won't say her last name, but Jane and I were an item in terms of dancing. We were the best dancers in the school. And so I had a lot of fun with the girls. I did not have a problem with girls at that point. I started to have a problem with women, however, and as I trace it back now, over at the end of my life, I see one key figure in our life, and it was this lady who looked like Marilyn Monroe. She was very voluptuous, very beautiful, blonde hair. And this was during the era when Marilyn Monroe was the goddess of the universe for every young boy. She was the most popular actress in the world, and she was on all the magazines all the time. And so you saw her everywhere, and this lady in our family environment looked like her. Problem is this lady, when she would come over to our house, she would tease me about girlfriends. And so whenever she would come over, it would be, got a girlfriend yet, David? And what's her name? And do you like her? And is she pretty? And she would always be teasing me about girls. And I felt utterly humiliated because half the time I didn't have a girlfriend, so I had to make one up. And I just felt humiliated, as though I was being made fun of. And in a way, I kind of was being made fun of. I was the little kid to be teased. And because she looked like Marilyn Monroe, because she was so voluptuous, being humiliated by that kind of a figure began to instill in me a fear that a sexually mature woman would humiliate me, that I had to watch out for them because they were dangerous. They wouldn't necessarily be nice to you, even though they were supposedly friends with you. And so that's when I think my fear of woman began to emerge. So I find myself in my teen years with this growing fear of women and this lack of affirmation from men, especially a father figure. And so in order to try to figure out, well, how do I interact with the opposite sex? 'Cause my dad's not modeling that for me. He's not teaching me that. I'm not so sure I'm acceptable as a male anyway. Nobody's affirming me that way. I don't have any male skills. I'm not a great athlete to try to stamp that into my soul with. I'm just this weakling, kind of a little kid. And so I began staring at the successful males in the school, just looking at them, trying to figure out what makes them so successful. Why are they so popular? And not all of them were handsome either, but they were popular. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what makes up the popularity? In some cases, it was an straight A student. Some cases, it was a football quarterback. Some instances, it was being handsome. So there was a variety of reasons, but I keyed in on all of those. And so I watched those guys, and I tried to emulate the way they dressed, the way they combed their hair, the way they walked, the way they talked. So I was trying to pull into myself an identity from these icons of maleness, these successful symbols of masculinity. And that search quickly became envious because sooner or later, when you're starting to do that, you realize, well, that tall, athletic quarterback, I'll never be like him because I'm not tall and I'm not athletic. And that guy who's really handsome, I'm never going to be him because I'm not handsome. And on and on and on. So this search that you began innocently to try to figure out how to be like somebody, well, eventually turns into envy in many cases because they have something you will never have as far as you're concerned. And when you begin to envy those people, then you're inviting in, of course, the demonic realm because envy is one of the sins. And so the deception only increases at that point because of the sin of envy. And that eventually turns into idolatry. And that's what happened to me. I went from just looking at them, admiring them, to envying them, to idolizing them. Now, if that process is happening, as it was with me, in the years of puberty, when your body is becoming sexualized, it's very easy for you to mistake that pull that you're feeling towards other guys to try to complete yourself as a sexual thing, because your sexual body is in your face day and night in those ages. And so this powerful sexual thing's going on, this pull towards men is going on, and they seem to unite into one thing, and you start saying to yourself, oh no, I must be gay, because why would I be attracted to these guys? Even though it's not sexual attraction at this point, I'm still attracted to them, so I must be gay. And so you begin labeling yourself and doubting yourself. And this was a great fear with me. I would rather have been dead than gay.
Would you like to find some clarity on the issue of homosexuality, what really causes it, and how God brings people out of it? Such Were Some of You is an award-winning documentary that delivers such clarity. It's an invaluable resource for every believer, church, or ministry that features 29 former homosexuals who bear witness to the power of God to transform anyone from anything.
I had to say, Lady Gaga, shut up. I was not born this way.
They know that I was stuck in the same flesh, struggle that they were stuck in. But I am free.
We've also produced a second documentary that shows family members how to respond to their homosexual loved one. It's called How Do You Like Me Now? When a child, parent, spouse, or sibling says they're gay.
I sat my parents down for the first time. They still had no clue. what was going on, and I said, I'm gay, I'm HIV positive, and how do you like me now?
Get both teaching resources on DVD at our online store by visiting purepassion.us. That's purepassion.us. Restored Hope Network is a coalition of ministries serving those who desire to overcome sinful relational and sexual issues in their lives and those impacted by such behavior, particularly homosexuality. RHN connects those seeking help with local member ministries and other resources. Even as the culture embraces distorted expressions of gender, sexuality, and relationships, RHN affirms God's unchanging hope and truth that Jesus Christ transforms the lives of all who seek Him. Visit restoredhopenetwork.org.
At one point during my father's discipline of me, I don't remember what I had done, but something pretty bad, and he was chasing me through the house, and I turned and I pushed him down the stairs. And, you know, to have a preacher father, a Scots Covenanter preacher father, no less, who in that kind of a family environment is God, and to push God down the stairs, I remember instantly thinking to myself, I'm going to hell. I have just pushed my father, who represents God, down the stairs. Fortunately, he didn't get hurt. He fell on the couch. But nevertheless, it was the act of pushing him down and the defiance. And I decided, I'm going to hell. My life is over. And because I made that decision in my mind, because I drew that conclusion in my mind, the only option left to me was to live like hell the rest of my life. Get as much pleasure as I could get out of life, because I was going to hell anyway. So why not just do it all and then face the music? And a lot of people who get into bondages, they get into their bondages because they do something that they believe they've crossed a line, and God will not love them beyond that line. He will not come and get them beyond that line. And so they believe they've crossed some line, and so they start acting even worse as a result. So I squeaked by my teen years with a bondage to masturbation, which was chronic, multiple times a day, pornography, all of this kept from mom and dad. And then I go to college. In college, I was finally out from under all the restraints. And, you know, when you've been suppressed like that and have so much fire and turmoil in you like I had, and all the restraints are left off, you truly go wild. And so I was maxed out on drugs in no time. Every single drug there was. I never shot heroin simply because I hated needles, but I dusted my marijuana with heroin. So I did every single drug there was to the max, and on several occasions trying to kill myself by taking overdoses. College was not a fun time. College was where I had to face the fact that I was having homosexual tendencies. And what was I going to do about it? I had my first sexual experience with a girl. I was determined to be heterosexual, and I was attracted to girls. So I was kind of like partially confused in that area. I think most people have a mistaken notion that you're either 100% heterosexual or 100% homosexual, and that's simply not true. The range of divergence is a continuum. And so I would say at the start I was like 50% confused in my sexual identity. Today people would call that bisexual, but it's really a continuum. And I was about 50% there at that point because I had not acted out. So I still had attraction to girls. Slept with this girl. It was wonderful. I was so glad it was wonderful because it was kind of proof that I didn't have to be homosexual that I was looking for. But as we continued the relationship over the years, over the months, I noticed that something was missing. Something was not getting satisfied. There was a void, even though it was pleasurable on the physical level. And I remember saying that to the girl one night, you know, I don't think we should see each other for a while here because I'm I'm feeling that something is missing, and I'm afraid it might be because I'm homosexual. Can't believe I even said that to my girlfriend. And her response really floored me. Her response was, I knew it. And that was like putting dynamite inside my heart. Because my greatest fear was that I was homosexual and people could tell it. I was the only one that was clueless. And here my own girlfriend is telling me she knew it. So at that point I decided, well, okay, the theater group at the college, which was heavily gay, had been stalking me for quite some time, several years by then, always after me. I decided, well, I'll just go with one of them and try it out, see if I am gay. Maybe I won't like it. So I had this sexual experience with this one guy, and I hated it. But then everybody knew that that was my struggle. So I became identified that way anyway because of going with that guy. I mean, he was not about to not tell everybody that the guy everybody was after finally gave in. So I took 12 hits of LSD that night. I tried it one more time. About a year later, I took a lot of downers, and I sat in the lounge. I wanted people to know how deeply I was hurting, but I simply didn't know how to tell them. So I sat in the lounge with a knife in my hand, trying to get up the courage to just plunge it into my chest. And I wanted everybody to see it because I was angry that nobody could see my pain, or if they did, they didn't care. And so I wanted to do it in front of everybody, or at least the people who would walk through that lounge at 2 in the morning, which actually was a lot of people at our college. And I simply couldn't get up the courage, and I just kept stabbing my leg. And I thought, well, at least people will see me stabbing my leg and send me to get help. But nobody walked through the lounge. And that was really sad. I felt completely abandoned. Abandoned by God, abandoned by my parents, abandoned by my classmates. Totally lost. I was a totally lost kid. And that's when I got the connection between letting a man do this to me and getting paid for it.